Welcome to our little kind of roundtable here on accessibility in design systems. As you all know, Knapsack is a design system platform, and we've brought a couple of folks from in-house, and we have a special guest with us today. So let's see who we are. Go ahead and there we go. Real fast, my name is Chris, principal dev over here at Knapsack. Started in components, started in front end. I've been able to kind of really get into the wild world of design tokens and everything else in between. Catherine, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I am the Senior Program Manager for Accessibility at GitHub. I'm formerly at Twitter and at Phase 2. I'm really been building my career on integrating accessibility from an operations perspective, trying to figure out, the best way to shift left all the way to QA, and what are the ways that we can do to kind of make accessibility the default, so to speak, so that we don't have to think about all the extra steps. So I really do a lot of my career is built around trying to make it easier for everybody to be more accessible. And as a person who is deaf, and I'm really passionate about mainstream inclusion and making sure that we all have shared experiences. So I'm super pleased to be a part of this panel. So thanks for having me.
It's awesome you're here. Josh, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hey folks, I'm Josh Mabry, software engineer here at Knapsack. I specialize in front-end systems and component-based architecture with an emphasis on accessibility and user experience. I was fortunate enough to learn a lot about advocating for accessibility from Catherine when I worked at Phase 2, and so I'm really excited to be here talking with her today.
All right. Let's see what we're going to talk about today real quick. I want to leave time for Q&A at the end. Folks, if you guys want to drop some questions into the Zoom Q&A panel, we'll get to them as we're talking, but we'll also hit them at the end. So these are the high points that we're going to go through really quick, right? Accessibility scores, what that means. Can we hit a perfect one? The age-old, conversation around like individual testing versus overall application testing. We'll talk a little bit about some libraries that are out there that are good and you should use. Everybody's talking AI right now. Let's see what AI can do, but also some caveats around AI and accessibility. And we'll talk a little bit about how Knapsack kind of helps us do testing and verification of accessibility within Knapsack. All right, next slide. Okay, can we, so for those that aren't aware, this is the Lighthouse panel inside of Chrome. You point it at a site and you say, give me numbers about this. This panel has caused many 1,000 hours of work. One of those numbers is the accessibility score and then feedback. Can we hit a perfect score? Catherine, what are your opinions on hitting a perfect score in Lighthouse?
A perfect score to me can be a false narrative. I don't think we should ever be achieving for perfection. We should be thinking about progress over perfection. And so you may achieve perfect one day, but what happens the next day when you have a different content creator who may upload an image with an alt text? It's no longer perfect. So what we need to be thinking about is what kind of processes are we putting into place that lead to that progress towards a more consistent score that is stable over time. And so, I don't want us to create that false narrative, because once we achieve a perfect score, we may think the work is done and sit back, and that's not what we want to see. So I think there is a nice balance of having just a little layer of challenge that needs to exist. I want people to always be challenged, thinking, how can I get even closer? So that is my take on progress over perfection.
Nice. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with Catherine there. I think it's about striving for continuous improvement instead of chasing a perfect score. You want to strive for ongoing progress, just by making practical improvements, focusing on the real user needs. I think these tools can catch a lot of issues, but there's still a huge importance on manual testing, getting user feedback, getting in and seeing how real people use these systems, because these machines aren't always going to catch that. It's an ongoing journey, rather than a perfect score, I think.
I think the best thing the Lighthouse score ever did for the web was give a number that non-technical folks can see and be angsty about hitting. And what I mean by that is, as technical folks, when we go to advocate for some kind of an improvement that isn't like an immediate visual feature, it's hard to argue for that. Watching number go up has been very good with project managers and product owners about like the value of the work that we're doing. So yeah, I don't think we're, ever going to, we can hit 100, but we won't stay at 100 because of the natural development cycle. But we at least have something we can always be checking in and be striving for.
Right.
Awesome.
I always appreciate gamifying things, right? Chasing a high score, right?
Awesome. All right. Next slide. I know there's a question about seeing the closed captioning. I see the alert that says a participant has enabled closed captioning on my side. I don't know what Zoom requires for that to be visible for participants. So awesome. So we've got 2 questions here, right? Or 2 sides to one question. Do you test the finished application as a whole, or do you spend a bunch of time testing all the little individual pieces? And how do you test everything? Catherine, what's your opinion on this?
I think it's much more valuable to evaluate the individual component because it helps us establish the priority as it relates to the whole. So when we're looking at the component, and I remember working on this so closely with Bloom and Josh, is what is the maximum value we can get out of this component for accessibility, and how can it transcend and go across our design system? So we spent some time thinking about what are the most commonly used components and how are they for accessibility. We would kind of start there. And when we did that, it created a sense of order and prioritization that helped accessibility not seem so overwhelming. And the challenge with testing an entire finished application is kind of like that perfect score we just said. We can test it, but it can look very different potentially the next week. So it's better to test the things that live in different places over different periods of time. It's kind of like a house. We want to use the right ramp. And that ramp is going to be used, the same standard ramp is going to be used everywhere. But we don't test just one building for that ramp and hope the other buildings will follow, if that makes sense. So we want to make sure that that same ramp, degree, and slope is used everywhere.
Awesome. Josh.
Yeah, I agree. I'll steal the house metaphor, right? I think you want each of your components, your individual pieces to be sound, to be strong. You want to lay a solid foundation and then build that house. But then once that house is built, you still want to do, further testing, right? Like kind of test it in the individual pieces, you make sure that's sound, and then, see it as a kind of more holistic view as it's all together. But yeah, if you focus at the component level, now you've got these individual pieces that are going to propagate throughout your whole system, right? And I think that, that in turn will help create a more holistic approach.
In my opinion here, has always been timing, right? We often don't have a full application until 3 days before go live, and we have to have something before we get there. Individual component testing gets us something day 0 versus like, oh, it's all together now, in the rush to finally get something launched. So obviously I'm a big fan of component testing. We have a whole suites of application for entire application testing, but my opinion is go hard in components early because you get a lot of value for the time. All right, next up. And I know we got some folks that are trying to get the closed captioning to work. It says it's working on my side, but it's some Zoom configuration per user is what it's telling me. We can work on this. Sorry about that, folks. All right, so yeah, a little bit more. This is just some details around what we're talking about here. But yeah, really wanting to focus on like the testing fosters the culture. So if you've got it early on, you've already got a culture of accessibility testing within your development team, and that's probably the most important thing. All right, next one.
Well, can I raise something really quick?
Yes, please.
My favorite accessibility statistics is that 67% of all accessibility issues can be caught in the design phase. And I think
design phase.
Yeah, and so if we can think about, what kind of components we're going to be using, and think about all of those front end elements in the beginning before we touch code, we'll be positioned that much better down the road, so that we can get in those issues before we even start. I think really sets up for success.
I think 60% of all development issues can be handled in the design phase, but that's just my opinion. Awesome. Next up. So we've got some tools, right? People want tools. People want to know, like, what can I run that just tells me this? And I get it. This is a deep skill set with a lot of nuance involved here, right? This is just a list of things we use or have used that are available, mostly free. Catherine, can you tell me a little bit about like the tooling that y'all use at GitHub and the tools that you've used in the past?
We continue to be pretty consistent using Axe tools by DQ, and that's one that is used most consistently. Kind of watching that space, especially since I understand DQ is coming out with some good tooling for Figma as well. So that's pretty exciting to watch. And so I think that just continue to be a general industry standard.
So it'll be like a plugin to Figma that, as you're designing, will tell you things like contrast as you're like drawing and laying things out.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Josh, what have you used?
I think I've used all the tools up here. They're definitely I would say, gold standards in these systems. And then, as I'm looking forward, just kind of keeping an eye out, I think DQ is offering some AI powered testing soon. So that's kind of the world I'm looking forward to, is, more AI automation in some of these systems to help with the manual testing, because again, these aren't replacements for manual testing, right? They help get the low hanging fruit, remove some of that, minutia, so you can focus on the larger problems.
I want to speak a little bit about that React helper line there. The greatest contribution to internet humanity that the Create React app project ever did was they, by default, installed an ESLint plugin called React A11Y, React Ally. So an entire generation of developers suddenly had their IDE yelling at them with little red squigglies as they were coding, and it was like, hey, you didn't put an ARIA tag here. Hey, you didn't put a description or a title on this image, or you didn't provide these proper links. Relations inside of a form. Whole generation didn't know anything about that. And if you looked on their project, there were all of these GitHub issues by folks who were like mad about this, right? And the team never backed down and said, no, this is how you have to code. So a whole generation got to learn how to do this just by this one little thing that they included by default in the Create React app. And I love that. And now, of course, I use that in all of our React and all of our TypeScript tooling as well. So just pointing that out, like something very, very small like that can end up teaching developers the importance of this, because your code won't compile. Otherwise, it's great. Awesome. Next slide. All right. So Josh, I'm going to let you talk about this one since you got more experience in the IA space.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and tackle this. So yeah, largely what I want to talk about around this slide. So obviously, I'm sure everybody's been inundated with AI news over the last several months. It's obviously at the forefront of everyone's mind, at the forefront of pop culture right now. It's very, very exciting. And I think the AI and these language models, some of these visual modalities have the potential to really level the playing field and make a lot of these interfaces more accessible for people through chat-based interfaces, things like that, custom content based on the person's needs. But what I really want to get people thinking about in this conversation is how we can advocate for accessible AI going forward. I think these language models, these various, I guess, models are only as good as the data they're fed with, right? So if they are fed with biased data, inaccessible code, that's what they're going to give us, right? So I think part of this is me hoping that everybody will begin thinking about how they can advocate for accessible and inclusive AI systems as they're starting to be asked to build things out for, their companies, or as they're exploring these things on their own. Microsoft has put together a couple documents kind of starting to look at how to make AI more inclusive. Now, I've just read that they fired their whole AI and ethics team. So let's just try to keep that fight going for them, I guess. I can throw some links in the chat if people want to take a look. There is the document In Pursuit of Inclusive AI, and then also the Hacks Toolkit, which is just kind of working on AI-human interaction and the guidelines around that. But yeah, does Catherine, have you done any kind of research around this field? Is this something you're kind of looking forward to?
Yeah, well, I'll try to talk about 3 different things, and I will try to stay focused. Well, first of all, from an accessibility perspective, I have already been using ChatGPT personally in my professional experience. I've actually started taking Zoom transcripts and using ChatGPT to transcribe meeting notes for me with action items. And that has really helped me reduce anxiety over trying to keep track of everything. So that's been pretty cool to watch. But interestingly, though, I have noticed that the meeting follow-ups have been without me, because the transcript is not fully understanding my speech. So Zoom doesn't fully understand my speech. Therefore, it doesn't get transferred over to ChatGPT to analyze. So I've been kind of exploring some of the language models that are personalized for people with atypical speech or foreign accents, so that they are not excluded from these AI tools, as I've been experiencing. So I'm starting to follow that. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a project with Google. And I'm hoping that I can start playing around with it, because I would like for my meeting notes to capture my comment as well. I think I have something to add to the meetings I'm in. And I also want to point out that I often speak about accessibility is not serving the average user. Accessibility is about serving the range of users. And I call that out because AI is based on averages.
Mm-hmm.
So we are potentially looking at bias and a disparate experience in, making sure that we're representative of all individuals, not an average set, but I think maybe coming up in the next slide. So that's something that I've been kind of thinking about. And also with the image alt text, there is opportunity for that has a good first draft of an alt text. I do not think it should be used automatically. It could be a great first draft, and then the user content creator can edit it with those guidelines. The reason being, I listened to a great podcast. It was actually a meetup with the presenters from Google, and they were explaining that there was a tweet of an image with Hillary Clinton on a stage, and the automatic AI set soccer player kicking a ball or something like that. And they would say, imagine if this person listened to soccer ball playing soccer and retweeted that, and then people like, why are you being so political? And not realizing it was a picture of Hillary Clinton. So that's the danger in using AI without curation, so to speak.
Awesome. I hadn't thought about that. You did mention bias, right? And for the next slide, I want to show a little bit, just here's an example of stuff we have to be vigilant about. On the left, I know it's going to be a little small text. We asked, GPT 3.5, generate me a card component, right? Classic card, image on the top, title, call to action, in React, right? And this is what we got on the left. Great, passable. On the right, we said, okay, now do what you gave me, but make it accessible using the features of HTML5 that we have available to us. And look how it changed, right? And look at the explanation down below of all of the reasonings that it went and made it more accessible. So just really important to point out here that, like, you know, the defaults coming out of these systems, you said something really important, which is the defaults are based on the averages, right? So you're going to get an average dead in the middle example here, right? You have to go above and beyond with these systems to make sure they have the context to serve the needs of all people. And that's what we see on the right-hand side. And this is great, right? It's an article tag. It's got the proper ARIA labels. It's using the proper descendant, you know, titles. So it can get there for sure. The code is great, but you got to tell it. Got to make sure you have the context.
And I just want to add, Josh in the chat here, great name, by the way, has a question about, is AI generate alt text better than none at all? And yeah, of course, I think, you know, obviously having no alt text is not where you want to be. However, I think if you find yourself in a position where you're relying on the AI alt text, you know, if the company or team or whatever, yeah, is not facilitating the space to have a human go in and manually intervene, I think you run into situations like Bloom just demonstrated here, where if you're just relying on the machine to output the information without any human intervention, you're going to end up in some hairy situations. And I think, especially right now, as these systems are new, we can't rely on them to do the right thing, to know everything that needs to happen, right? So I just encourage people to not get complacent with these systems and to actually, you know, be the person in the middle to intervene, and also to advocate that your teams and your companies don't 100% rely on these systems, right? And that there are fail safes in place and there are people there to make sure that we are doing the right thing, because we do have a chance with these systems to right a lot of the wrongs that have been created in the past around these interfaces and the inaccessibility of these systems. So I just want us to all be cognizant of that as we're moving forward. Yeah,
and it's also critically important is the context of that image being used. You know, the most common example I use when describing the importance of alt text is a disaster recovery website. And there's an image of two disaster recovery workers and a survivor in front of a torn down home. So, you know, as a disaster recovery website, it's about getting donations and aid. So to have an image that conveys they're first responders, they're there to help, they're there to console, and they're there to support people, it's kind of pulling at the purse strings and the people to say, oh, wow, I want to donate, I want to support this group. So if you just use generative alt text of two people in front of a torn down home, it's not the same as showing a disaster response coming to the aid of a survivor. Is also like that context really helps, it really matters. And so I want to make sure that is AI empathetic? We don't know, you know, and that's a question that we have to check and ask ourselves.
Nice. Thank you. Last slide here. I know we're gonna end up running a little bit over time. We're gonna try to finish up right on the hour, right on the half hour. But next slide here, Lindsay. We're gonna talk a little bit about just like what Knapsack does here around this really fast. Knapsack is a design systems management tool. We provide the ability for all components within your design system to have pages and schemas and interactability. I'm going to try to share my screen really fast, Lindsay, if that's possible, just kind of show what we can do here. So I do want to show that, like, here is, you know, this is the Knapsack interface for our internal design system called Toby. I apologize if it's a little washed out. I have an HDR screen. But you can see this is the button component, and you can see all of our, you know, our variations of a button being rendered with all of their props and their schema, right? So this is great from like a design and a data perspective. But more importantly, Knapsack is about the documentation and the raw words around the components. This is a very, very new page. Normally, you would see how to use the button and the considerations around using a button on kind of our more mature design systems that we worked with. There will be pages of information here for developers and designers on considerations around where this button goes on a page, what its background can be, what is allowed to be used next to, and that kind of stuff. So Knapsack is both documentation as well as a development tool, and we have a lot of space for that kind of writing, that kind of markdown. Second of all components within Knapsack show up as standalone URLs that are fully accessible to tooling. Y'all are probably familiar with Cypress. You saw Cypress acts as one of the tools listed before. This is where you can individually take a component and go poke it a bunch with your tools, right? Knapsack provides an easy to access list of all components in their URL, so you can throw all of your automated tooling at your hundreds of permutations and find out things like, the white button text is too light on this color of a background for the button. Well, now we have to go back to our WCAG standards and see what we can do about solving that. So anyway, that's really what Knapsack brings to the table here around accessibility, is it makes the tooling that you have and that your team uses a lot easier to integrate into your design systems development flow, as well as collaborating with your designers around the words that they want to say about the components. So that's all I have to say about that. We have a little bit, we have time if folks want to stick around. We have some questions here. Lindsay, do you want us to start taking Q&A right now?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. Okay, so we have some questions in here. We've got conversations around AI Clippy actually being useful. That's how we know that AI has made it, if Clippy is actually helpful. Sorry. All right. Isn't the SEO the same if the alt text is organically generated versus AI generated? Now, when you say SEO, I would say that you know, the better the description, the more relevant the search results for what your image is representing, right? So, you know, if we do have text being generated by AI for us and it's right most of the time, that's better than nothing, right? Obviously, that's going to help our Google score more than that. But yeah, Tom, if you've got some like more clarifications on that questions, I'd like to hear it. Is there any notable documentation like WCAG guidelines that focus on accessibility for enterprise and B2B? That is a wonderful question. Catherine, you are in enterprise.
So the short answer and the long answer is that is WCAG. All of WCAG applies to virtually everybody. There's no specific guidelines. Section 508 is what is applicable to government, which also, you know, follows WCAG principles. So enterprise and private businesses should conform to WCAG, all of it. There's no slicing or dicing at WCAG.
Really, it's the 508 around the government considerations and the government sites versus, you know, there's nothing out there that says businesses have to do anything, right? Unless those businesses interface through government and provide services for citizens through government programs, then they have to. Yeah.
There was a recent Section 508 refresh a couple of years ago. And after like 10 years of trying to come up with new guidelines, they ultimately said, you know what? It's WCAG, AA, is the new standards we follow. So that made it a lot easier and more simplified.
Nice. Over's got a question here. Does Knapsack support a section for accessibility per component where you can describe accessibility considerations, do's, don'ts, etc.? So in our design around what we wanted to put around components, and there we call them demos, we thought about tabs that were really specific to like concepts around a component. Like here's the accessibility one, here's the performance one, here's the, you know, the anything else that we would want to track. And at the end of the day, basically, our users need so much customization that we went with a really flexible content model so users can make whatever they want. And a lot of them do, especially our really big customers. They've got tabs around, you know, A11Y, you'll see the tag, and it'll just be a list, usually copy pasted, right? It's not necessarily unique per component, but you'll see our users kind of customize the way that they list their content around their needs as a team. And absolutely, we have A11Y tabs on components in certain teams, and some teams, none of that. Or they dump it right into the root overview, right? But you have the ability to kind of add any content you want to components in Knapsack. Awesome. Yeah, Knapsack is as much of a content management system around the design systems component and development as anything at this point. Sweet. Any other questions we have for folks? Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for making it a few minutes over the half an hour. Really, really appreciate your time. Catherine, thank you so much for jumping right in and being a panelist with us today. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Josh, for taking time out of your day. Lindsay, do you want to talk about the Talking Tokens webinar?
Yeah, sure. Every last Wednesday of the month, we have a webinar. The next one is Talking Tokens. We have some design system leaders coming, as well as the CEO of Knapsack, Chris Strahl. We'll be talking about bridging the gap between tokens and tooling, tokens for the rest of us, how to get 80% of the value with 20% of the effort, and then more AI discussion around design tokens. And of course, there will be more, and time for questions as always. I have put the registration link in the chat, and you will also get that via email or the design tokens or the design system Slack channel if you're a part of that, or however you guys are finding out about these webinars. They will be there.
Awesome. A little bit for me to add here at the end. The Microsoft links got put into chat instead of the Q&A. So I just added them answered there so that you can see those Microsoft links. Tom, thanks for the clarification there. It's sort of like, hey, if the alt text is written by humans versus by AI, will it have a higher indexing? And honestly, today, no, there's no indications to any of the robots that robots are doing the work. So yeah, to answer your question, it's pretty much a wash, and whichever one can get you the most benefit. Like we say, any alt text is better than no alt text. Last thing, I wrote the tokens engine in Knapsack. Go to this webinar. Let's talk tokens and why they're so important to design systems. Awesome. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.